Amen. You guys can take a seat. Good morning. I'm excited to be here, and I hope you are too. I'm not even going to ask whether you're excited because you look excited. I can see it on your faces today. And I'm just going to go ahead and assume that's because of church and not because you get a few days off later this week. On September 8th, 1860, the steamship Lady Elgin broke apart and sank in the frigid waters of Lake Michigan just off the rocky shores outside of Evanston, Illinois, and over 300 of the 400 people on board the ship lost their lives. Some of them even made it close to the shore before being swept under by the breakers and drowning. But after word of the wreck spread, some ministry students from Northwestern University and the Garrett Biblical Institute headed to the shore to see how they could help. And one student, a young man named Edward Spencer, tied a rope around his waist, and he instructed his friends to assist him by pulling him back every time he was able to grab onto someone, and he dove into the water. And for the next 6 hours, Edward Spencer dove in again and again and again and again until he had single-handedly rescued 17 people from the stormy waters. And after the 17th crash victim was safely delivered to the shore, Edward Spencer, on the brink of hypothermia, his body exhausted from swimming against the current for hours, and his bones beaten, bruised, and broken from crashing against the rocks, collapsed. A few hours later, he woke up in his room. His brother William was standing there waiting on his recovery, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Will, did I do my full duty? Did I do my best?" And his brother assured him that he had, but it came at great cost. Because of the toll that this all took on Edward Spencer, he wasn't able to complete his studies. He was forced to drop out of school, and he was crippled. He was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And decades later, while revisiting the scene of his heroic sacrificial actions, a reporter asked Spencer about the lives of those he'd rescued, how many of them he'd kept in touch with, and how closely over the years. And he paused and looked down and said, "None. Not one of them ever came back and even said thank you." This morning we're finishing our This Is Us series. We spent the last month talking about generosity, how God is scandalously generous, and how he tells us that we are made in his image to be generous too, with our lives and with our love and with our finances and with everything we have. And I want to close the series this morning by talking about something I think is one of the key foundational ingredients to living a lifestyle of generosity, but I think it's something that's in relatively short supply in our culture of selfishness and greed and entitlement. I want to talk about gratitude. It's not an accident that we're talking about gratitude this week. For those of you who aren't aware, this is a major holiday week in the United States, right? And this week is like, for most of us, I think second only to Christmas in terms of like the holidays that we get most fired up about. Just show of hands, how many of you are pumped for this week? Yeah, that's what I expected. It is awesome. It is Black Friday week, you guys. It's the best. There's not another week like this in America. You know, like, and my favorite part, one of my favorite things about Black Friday week is that on Black Friday Eve, we stuff ourselves full of food so that we have the caloric energy to shop for 20 straight hours. It is amazing. It's interesting, okay, to stop and think about Thanksgiving through the lens of gratitude, because I think somewhere along the way in our world and our culture, we kind of lost this holiday. It just got missed and absorbed into the materialism and the commercialization of Christmas. And so many of us these days, instead of sitting around a table together, being intentional about remembering and discussing the blessings in our lives for which we are thankful, so many of us sit around a table together and look through ad after ad after ad for all the new stuff we got to go out and get. The bigger, better, shinier, newer things that we don't really need, but we really want, and deep down we're convinced we really deserve. And there's a link between our level of satisfaction with the things we have, with the things God's blessed us with, and our willingness to give our lives and our stuff away for the sake of the people around us. One of the greatest inhibitors to generosity is ingratitude. I'm going to say it again because it's really important. One of the greatest inhibitors to generosity in our lives is ingratitude. And we've all been there. We've all suffered from it. Like, how many of you have ever been accused of being ungrateful? Time out. You don't got to raise your hands. That's an unfair question. I don't want to put you on the spot so everyone looks around and judges you. I'll ask it in a different way that I think is maybe more fair. How many of you have ever been a 5-year-old? All right, yeah. Ingratitude is a pretty universal condition. We've all experienced it. And the Bible makes it clear that there's a deep connection between our gratitude towards God and our generosity toward a world in need. John writes it this way in 1 John 3:16 through 18. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. So this morning I want to dig into what it kind of looks like in our lives to cultivate the kind of gratitude that makes our lives richer and makes them better, that results in love and generosity flowing out of us. And we're going to do that by looking at this really interesting interaction that Jesus had with a group of people. If you have your Bibles with you this morning, you can open them up to Luke chapter 17. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry, the words will be on the screen. If you don't own one, or your kids don't, we have them in a bunch of colors and a bunch of kids' versions in the back. We would love for you to snag one before you go. But Luke 17, starting in verse 11, talks about this interaction Jesus had. It goes like this. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. Now, 2 quick hit historical background facts. Okay, first of all, Samaria was this region between Galilee, which was way up in the north, where Jesus and a lot of his disciples were from, and Jerusalem, which is in the south. And Samaritans and Jews did not get along. They had some common ancestry, but the Samaritans were the ancestors of some Jews who had intermarried with the Assyrians when the nation got conquered. And long story short, there was bad blood. The Jews looked down on the Samaritans. That's going to come into play later in the story. Second thing, Jesus saw these 10 guys who had leprosy. Leprosy is really gross. It's interesting, like leprosy is a disease that has recently been cured. In the last 20 years, over 16 million people across the globe have been healed of leprosy. It's a disease that's treatable now, but it wasn't back then. There wasn't a whole lot you could do about it, and it was incredibly painful. It affected the skin, and it would cause open sores to happen all across the body, and it also affected the nervous system. Like nerve endings would just die off to the point that a lot of people with leprosy eventually couldn't feel their hands or their feet or their extremities, and in extreme cases, body parts and limbs would rot to the point that they just fell off. And I have a picture this morning of what that looks like. I'm going to throw on the screen just because I want you to get a feel for the severity of this condition. If you're squeamish, you may want to look away. Can we get the picture of leprosy up there? Yeah, okay. This is serious stuff. It's no joke. You can all look. It's safe now. I wasn't going to put a real picture up. It's really gross, but this really happened. Okay, so Jesus is talking to these guys who are hurting, and they're sick, and they're in a place where they're in danger of their limbs falling off of their body. And he meets them, and this is how it goes down. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." Now here's why they stood at a distance. Legally, they had to. Okay, the physical pain of leprosy was pretty significant, but the emotional pain was maybe even greater. Because the disease was contagious, lepers were societal outcasts. They couldn't live inside the city. They got kicked out. They had to go live in the wilderness, and so they kind of banded together way outside the city in what were called leper colonies. They couldn't even come near the city, and if anyone came near them, or they were within like shouting distance of a person, they legally had to scream out, "Unclean, unclean, unclean," so that people knew to walk way around them and steer clear so they wouldn't catch the disease. This was a humiliating and isolating condition. They were cut off from relationships. They were cut off from physical contact. And they were cut off from the temple, from the religious life of their society. So these guys see Jesus, and they do the only thing they can do. They call out to him from a distance. And this is the point in the story where we would expect that Jesus would walk over and lay a hand on them and heal them, because he does it all the time, all over the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are full of stories where Jesus sees sick people, walks over, puts his hand on them, and they're healed. But this time Jesus doesn't. He does something unique. He yells back at them. This is what he does in verse 14. It says, when he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And he just kept walking, which is a really weird thing for Jesus to do, because a lot of times he's pretty invested, but these guys yell at him and he just yells and walks on. And there's a few layers that are happening here. Okay, first of all, in the Old Testament time, the law said if you had a disease which made you unclean, a disease like leprosy, which cut you off from community and cut you off from the life of society, and you got healed, if somehow it got better, the way that you could get permission to move back into the city and to come back into the temple and to resume relationships, the way you got permission was to go visit a priest, and the priest would check you out. Like get your height, weight, blood pressure, listen with the stethoscope, say ah. I don't know if that's how it went, but that's how it goes when I get checked out, so I'm assuming, right? And the priest would give you the clean bill of health and be like, all right, you're good to go. So you had to see a priest. But there's something crazy going on here. Jesus yelled at these guys to go show themselves to the priest, but there was a problem. He didn't heal them first. They still had leprosy. And if the nearest priest was in Jerusalem, that's a 2-day journey minimum from the border between Samaria and Galilee, which is kind of a long trip to make and a fairly big commitment when you're looking at your dangling, rotting fingers thinking, I'm not better yet. But somehow all 10 of these guys decide, well, let's give it a shot. We got nothing to lose. That might not even have been Jesus. Leprosy also affects your eyesight. Okay, so they saw this long-haired guy and his band of merry dudes walking along with them from a ways off, and they yelled, "Jesus, have mercy." And this crazy guy yelled back, "Go show yourself to a priest." And they still have leprosy, and they don't even know that it was Jesus, but they're like, it might be our only hope. Let's go. And right now they're living on hope. Right? You commit to that kind of journey, you got to be hoping and believing that something will happen along the way. Because if you get there and nothing happened, you're going to get turned away. You're going to get cast out. You're going to get rejected all over again. So we got to understand, for these 10 guys to even take that journey was a pretty big step of faith. But they head out to see the nearest priest. And wherever they're going, they haven't probably been there in years. And for what it's worth, we don't know where they went. It doesn't say where the closest priest was located. It could have been only hours away from where they were living in the wilderness. But my guess is, because of the way society functioned, because of the way this story is written, because of the way the priesthood worked, and because of what happens next, my guess is it was a whole lot farther away, like Jerusalem, like 2 days farther away than we usually think when we read this story. Check out what happens next. As they went, they were cleansed. First things first, that's nuts. This is Jesus' craziest miracle yet. Like usually he's at least there when people get healed, and now 10 dudes are a long way away from him, and suddenly they're healed. They're better. Jesus yells at them, "Start walking," and they do, and they're transformed along the journey. And we don't know how long it took. It may have been an hour into the journey. It may have been that they camped out overnight and they woke up in the morning and they were healed. It may not have happened until the city was in view. But at some point, after Jesus told them to go see a priest and they started walking, they were healed. The only thing we know is it didn't happen immediately. Some time passed before the healing happened. And there's no possible way, no way that when it happened, their minds weren't totally blown. So this is what they did next. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back. Praising God in a loud voice, he threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. One of them. One saw healing and turned back. We don't know how far away he was. He could have been an hour away from Jesus. He could have been 6 hours away. He could have been a day away from Jesus. But one of these guys, when he saw that he was healed, realized that he had to go back. He had to thank Jesus for what had happened. He was overcome with gratitude, and he was a Samaritan, which is shocking to Jesus' disciples. These 12 guys who looked down on the Samaritans thought that they were less than and unworthy. And it's the Samaritan that comes back. 9 of these guys saw healing and they ran ahead, but he decided that he needed to turn back to thank the one who had enabled him to move forward. And Jesus asked him this question. You can almost see Jesus smiling as he asks it. He kind of says it sarcastically. But he says, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? And then he said to him, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. Where are the other 9? I think we have a tendency when we hear this story to think about those 9 who couldn't even bother to say thank you to Jesus and decide in our heads that they must be bad dudes, that they're just a bunch of jerks, that they're awful, terrible people. We read the story and we see ourselves as the one who comes back and falls at Jesus' feet and gives thanks, and we think, man, those 9 guys are awful. But I wonder if we aren't a whole lot more like them than we want to admit. Like, here's a bunch of guys, their death sentence just got commuted. And they're looking at healing thinking, this is beyond what I hoped for. This is everything I ever wanted. I can go back to my wife. I can go back to my family. I can go back to life, and I deserve this. I didn't ask for leprosy. I didn't want to get this disease. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't sin to deserve leprosy. I've been waiting for healing, and I've expected healing. This is what should have happened. You know, and I earned it. I went on this journey of faith. I did what I was told to do, and by my actions, I earned it. I deserve healing. Thank God that I'm finally healed. This is how it should be. And really easily and really subtly and really unintentionally, they slip into a mindset of entitlement. And only one stops to say thanks because he realizes that something is missing, that the equation and the healing are incomplete without an expression of gratitude. I think the question for us is, who are we going to be? Who are you going to be? Will you be the one? The odds are stacked against you. Will you be the one who stops daily to give thanks and honor and praise to the one who gave you back your life, who came and died so that you could be forgiven and set free and reconciled? Will you be the one who stops in the middle of the craziness and the busyness and all the excitement of life and turns back to worship the Creator who's responsible for the breath that's coming through your nostrils and the heartbeat in your chest? Or will you be the 9? And we be the 9, not just with God, but with everyone else around you. With all the people in your life who equipped you to get to the place that you are, because wherever you are, you didn't get there alone. Will you be the 9, or will you stop? Will you thank your boss, thank a mentor, thank the people across the hall serving in kids ministry who give their lives and their passion to help your kids meet Jesus every week? Will you thank a parent, thank a friend, thank a coach, thank a teacher? Or will you be like most people in our world and decide, I had this coming to me, I deserve it. This is how things should be. I don't have time to say thank you to everybody. I think most of us hear those questions, and we permit ourselves to land like somewhere in the middle. We look at our lives, and we look in the mirror and say, I'm not an ungrateful person. I don't have like a bitter, hateful heart. I'm not lacking in gratitude. I just don't say it a lot. I don't feel the need to make a big show of it. I don't, do a whole lot about it, but just because I don't do anything doesn't mean that my heart is hard and ungrateful. Let me throw this out there. I have no doubt, absolutely zero, that the 9 guys who did not turn back were grateful in their hearts that they were healed. But Jesus seems to think something is missing when that's the only place gratitude resides in us. I have no doubt, absolutely zero, that the 17 people who were plucked from the angry waters of Lake Michigan by Edward Spencer at great personal cost to him were pretty thankful that they were alive, but something was missing as he sat on the shore and he didn't even know their names because not one turned back. Something was missing. A lot of us have heard the phrase at some point in our lives, an attitude of gratitude. How many of you have heard that? You know why you've heard it? Because it rhymes, so it sounds really clever. But we need a bigger, better vision of what gratitude is all about this morning, because the kind of gratitude that'll change your life, the kind of gratitude that'll bring you joy, that'll shift your perspective, the kind of gratitude that will unleash love and generosity in your life, The kind of gratitude that will inspire you to make the difference in this shattered world you were created to make. That kind of gratitude is not an attitude. It's an action. It's a verb, not a feeling. One of America's most brilliant sociologists is a professor named Brené Brown. I love the way she puts it in her book, The Gifts of Imperfection. It seems to me that gratitude without practice may be a little bit like faith without works. It's not alive. There's this crazy catch with generosity. We see it play out pretty explicitly in the interaction between Jesus and these 10 lepers. And in the story of Edward Spencer and the 17 shipwreck victims he saved. Unexpressed gratitude looks and feels a whole lot like ingratitude. If we have thankfulness and it exists only in our minds and it never migrates to our mouths, if it exists only in our hearts and it never migrates to our hands, then it doesn't do a lot of good in the world to us or to anybody else. It's not useful. And the simple truth is, I think so often, and I do this, okay, so often we make excuses for personality type and the way we're wired. We say, well, I'm just not somebody who lives and works like that, and that's all garbage. It's all stuff that we say to convince ourselves that we shouldn't have to do the things we selfishly don't want to do. The simple truth is this: if you cannot express gratitude, you do not understand your debt. The inability to put thankfulness into action with our words and our deeds is a symptom of pride and greed. In our lives, this is how it works with blessings. Okay, every time. This is how it works with everything we got and everything we get. And God warns us that it's true. Every provision will turn into either praise or pride. Everything God puts on our plates and in our hands, every provision will turn into either praise or pride. And it's really easy to walk down the road of pride. God illustrates that in Deuteronomy chapter 8. He's talking to his people about the promised land. He says, I'm going to take you into this new land, and it's full of milk and honey and all these blessings. But those blessings that you're going to receive, the comfort and the affluence and the beautiful life that you're walking into, those blessings have the potential to shape your soul in one direction or another. And this is what he tells them. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with brooks and streams and deep springs gushing out into the valleys and hills. A land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil, and honey. A land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing. A land where the rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. When you've eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he's given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commandments, his laws, and his decrees that I'm giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. He led you through the vast and dreadful wilderness, that thirsty and waterless land, with its venomous snakes and scorpions. He brought you water out of a hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the wilderness, something your ancestors had never known, to humble and test you so that in the end it might go well with you. You might say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant which he swore to your ancestors as it is today. It is so tempting. It is for me. It was for the Israelites thousands of years ago, and I think it still is for us today, to look at what we have and say, I earned this, and I deserve this. I did this all on my own. By the power of my hands, by my hard work, I earned it. It's mine. I got it. It came to me, which means I deserve it, and it's for me. In our comfort and our affluence, we're often blinded to the incredible undeserved generosity, not just of other people, but of the one who is the source and provider of all things. And we forget when things are going well that we have a debt to him, not just for the fact that he's good and he provides, but for the fact that we're breathing, for the fact that he saved us. That we aren't just sick people made well because of the blood shed on the cross and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We're dead people who have been made alive. We have a debt that we can never even begin to repay. But it's so easy for us to just get caught up in seeing what we got and what we get through the lens of our world. And then to allow God's provision in our lives to turn into pride. We get proud and then we see God's blessings as though we made them, as though somehow we conjured them up out of the ether. The product of our hard work and our skill and our awesomeness and our effort and our worthiness. And when we think that, we really struggle to live with radical generosity because people around us don't deserve the stuff that we earned, right? And greed starts to fill up that place in our souls where love was meant to reside. And then we wonder why it's a struggle for us to give. Why it's a struggle for us to live out this vision of generosity that God paints for us, and why our stuff doesn't make us as happy as we thought it would. The author Erwin McManus puts it this way in his book, Uprising. What's the path to wholeness in our lives? We see this path more clearly if we recognize that greed's ugly stepsister is ungratefulness. Greed always wants more. When we're greedy, we are never satisfied. Whatever we receive from others, we conclude we deserve. And in whatever quantity it may come, it is never enough. Lack of gratitude is a manifestation of an abundance of greed. From the vantage point of the taker, it is his or her justification for always demanding. He's endlessly disappointed in others. No one ever comes through for him. No one ever keeps his promises. Everyone always falls short of his expectations. There's no need for thanks except thanks for nothing. No truth, no matter how profound, will find its way into the heart that is absent of gratitude. I can't help but wonder this Thanksgiving week if like stepping back and taking a moment to remember that all we got and all we get is from God. If being intentional this week about pausing to say thanks to the one to whom we owe an incredible unpayable debt might change the direction of our lives and the shape of our souls. Like, what if this week we decided we're going to stop allowing provision to turn into pride? And we're going to make sure that our provision turns into praise. What would that do in our hearts as it relates to generosity? Psychologist Henry Cloud says that people who express generosity regularly are not only happier and healthier, they're less materialistic and less selfish. Gratitude creates space in our lives for generosity, which unleashes our full creative potential on the world. It's almost like Jesus was right when he said it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. I think for us, when provision turns into pride, when we take the blessings we've received and we move on to what's next and what we need now and what we want now and what we expect now and what we deserve now without pausing to say thank you to God or those around us, when we live like the 9 rather than the 1, it's really, really easy to cling to all of our stuff and convince ourselves that we can't be generous yet until we get a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. Once we get more, then we can be generous. Once we have enough, once we have what we would consider excess, then we can be generous. But I think that scarcity is a myth born out of ingratitude, and the Bible makes it clear. Generosity is less about accumulation than it is about appreciation. When we're grateful for what we've got and we know who gave it to us, we can come with hands wide open. So we got a challenge for all of us this week. You got a day or two off of work or school, so I'm going to give you homework. Ha! You're welcome. Okay, and the homework is about cultivating not just an attitude, but some actions of gratitude, because you got some time. Let's be straight, it's past time for a lot of you. There are a lot of you sitting here this morning that are walking in blessings that used to be your prayer requests, and you have not yet turned back to say thank you. So the time is now. This Thanksgiving, you're going to cut into a delicious, moist turkey. Okay? As it hits your lips, I want you to remember something, that eating the turkey does not count as participating in giving thanks. Okay? Your calorie count on Thursday is not evidence of or in any way correlated to your level of gratitude. Okay, so here's what I want us to do. 4 things. 4, they're not that hard. Sorry, not sorry. Okay? Number one, I want you to make a list of 12 things. It's one for every month. That is not a difficult task. 12 things over the last year of your life that you're thankful for to God. I want you to think, here's a list of 12 things God did in my life, big or small, that I am grateful for. And I want you to take some time this week to be intentional about turning back, stopping and falling at the feet of Jesus and saying, thank you. You're the one who provides. I'm turning this provision into praise. Thank you, God, for this. If you're sitting here this morning and you don't believe in God, we're so glad you're here. You can keep showing up here. You don't have to believe like us or behave like us before you can belong like us. We want you to keep showing up and keep crashing into Jesus, but you're not off the hook on this one. Here's what I want you to do. If you're not convinced that God is real, if you're not sold that Jesus is who he says he is, I still want you to make a list of the 12 most incredible, ridiculous things that happened over the course of the last year in your life. And then I want you to just take a minute and ask the question, did this really all come from me? Did all these things happen because of my greatness and my worthiness and my effort? And if they didn't, where and who are they coming from? Make a list. 12 things. You can go more if you want to. Minimum of 12. Number two, I want you to tell somebody thank you. Another human being. To their face, audibly so they can hear it. You can't mumble it. That doesn't count. Okay? Tell somebody thank you. And I know there's a bunch of kids out here and married guys who are thinking, oh, great. If I tell my mom, if I tell my wife now, she's going to think I only said thank you because you told me to. She is. But that's okay. Because check it out. If you don't tell her thank you now, she already thinks you're ungrateful. If you don't tell her thank you right now after I just talked about it, think how mad she's going to be then. So just do it. And don't do that thing where you think like, I'll wait a couple days so she thinks it's my idea. She knows you. My wife knows me. It's not your idea. Just do it. It's not any of our idea. It's God's idea. Just say thanks. Find somebody you can thank. Number three, I want you to write a letter. Just one. Write a letter to somebody. I know you hate writing and your hand cramps when you do it. I understand. My hand feels like it's going to fall off after the fourth word that I write, okay? But, write a letter to somebody. And I know it's also easier to write letters for people like me who love words probably too much than it is for some of you who don't like words. It doesn't have to be a long letter. Find a thank you note and write a few words to somebody because you didn't get where you are on your own. Write a thank you note. Write a few sentences to somebody, spend 50 cents and put it in the mail, see what it does in their life, and see what it does in yours to say thank you. Number four, we're going to do this one right now. The band's going to come up now, and we're going to spend some time just singing out thanks and praise to God once again. Just kicking off Thanksgiving week by coming before the Father who is so good and singing about how good he is in our lives. And Grant's going to play for a little while right after I pray. I'm going to pray in a minute. And then I want to invite everybody kind of as he does that. And then as we begin the next worship set, as we sing together, I want to invite you to make your way to one of these tables around the room. There's 4 of them. Let's spread out evenly. There's just some metal pieces on those tables. And as Grant plays and as we sing, I want you to write down as a prayer one thing that you're thankful for to God. We're going to take the first step right now together. The first step, out of ungratefulness towards just profound thankfulness to the God who we owe more than we could ever repay. Just go. You can write it on the front, write it on the side, wherever. But write down on there one thing you're thankful for and just say it as a prayer. God, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this blessing. I'm turning this provision into praise. Find one thing and write it down. Because I'm convinced if we do this individually and if we do this collectively, as we cultivate gratitude in our lives, what we're going to find is that it's an endless resource. That it grows and it overflows out of our hearts right alongside love and right alongside generosity, and it inspires us to come humbly and thankfully before God and be the future-shaping force that he created the church to be. Will you guys pray with me? Thank you. Thank you for your love. Thank you for coming and dying so that we could live. Lord, we come before you with the knowledge that we have a debt we can never repay. And with the knowledge, too, that it's so easy in our lives and in our world to look at everything we've got, Just like the Israelites did thousands of years ago and get so comfortable that we decide it's all from us and it's all for us. God, would you just open our eyes? Would you open our eyes and open our hearts to gratitude? Let us see rightly that you're the source of everything we've got, and allow that gratitude in us to create space for us just to live with this radical, crazy love and radical, crazy generosity in a hurting world that is desperate for your church to be all that you created your church to be. Thank you, God. In Jesus' name, amen.